Good morning, welcome to CATEX TV. My name is Frank Fortunato. Today is Wednesday, May 15th, 2013. Some interesting economic news has come across. France has apparently entered a recession in the first quarter of 2013. The French economy contracted by 0.2%. Germany showed that it had a small gain. It was a weak start for that first quarter. Their growth came in at only 0.1%. This marks France's first recession, however, in 4 years. The announcement came after the number of jobless people in France hit an all-time high in the month of March. French growth has faltered, with increasing unemployment undermining the confidence of businesses and consumers, which are struggling both to cope with government belt-tightening. Of course, French President Hollande thinks that belt-tightening should end and stimulus should begin. Presumably, this information will give further impetus to his plans. Meanwhile, in England, the outgoing governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, has declared that a British recovery is now in sight. He presented his final forecast with an improved outlook for the British economy. He said that growth may accelerate to 0.5% this quarter from 0.3% in the first 3 months of last year. He also raised projections for the next 3 years. He said this has not been a typical recession and it will not be a typical recovery. We don't see a particularly rapid recovery, but we do see one, and I think there are good reasons for that. He said that there's an optimistic outlook on both economic growth and inflation. It was the first time he's been able to say that since the crisis struck. Meanwhile, in the United States, since the recession ended 4 years ago, the federal budget deficit has topped $1 trillion every year. But now, the government's deficit is shrinking far quicker than anyone in Washington expected. This is the thrust of a new report issued by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office yesterday. It said that for the fiscal year, which ends on September 30th, the budget deficit will fall to about $642 billion, or only 4% of the nation's annual economic output. This is $200 billion less than the agency had forecasted just 3 months ago. The agency forecast that the deficit, which topped 10% of gross domestic product in 2009, could shrink to as little as 2% by 2015. This would be a level that most analysts say could easily be sustainable over the long run. There is concern, however, that with the unemployment in the U.S. still not going below 7.5%, that the deficit reduction could be coming too quickly. However, overall, it's pretty good news. In Nigeria, a major oil producer, the President Goodluck Jonathan has imposed a state of emergency in 3 states in the northern part of the country in an attempt to curb increasingly violent attacks by the armed rebel group Boko Haram. The declared state of emergency is in the state of Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa. Troops are being immediately moved into the area. The cyclone threatening to lash low-lying coastal areas of Bangladesh and Myanmar appears to have weakened, according to the United Nations. Cyclone Mahasen has now been downgraded to a Category 1. It still will pose a threat to about 8 million people. When it makes landfall in Bangladesh sometime tomorrow night, it's going to come with 20 inches of rain, as well as a storm surge and strong waves. Most of Bangladesh lies below sea level, so it presents a big problem. That Lion air crash with a Boeing 737-800 in Indonesia in February has now been preliminarily investigated. Apparently what happens is the Transportation Safety Committee of Indonesia has ruled out any major problems with the 737 plane itself, but they did criticize the pilot training and procedures. They said at the time of the crash, a young second-in-command pilot was at the controls at a very critical time. Weather reports indicated that there was a sudden loss of visibility in the area as the plane was coming into land, adding that the 24-year-old second-in-command was in charge of the plane seconds before the plane crashed into the sea just above the runway. Apparently, although all 108 passengers and crew survived, the plane was a total loss. The preliminary report said that the 24-year-old, who had 1,200 hours of flying time, was in control during the descent into the airport and reported that he could not see the runway at 900 feet. The captain then switched off the autopilot, and the second in command handed over controls to him at 150 feet, or 1 minute before the crash, after he repeated that he still couldn't see the runway. 1 second before the crash, the captain commanded a go-round attempting to abort the landing, but it was too late. The report recommended that Lion Air review the policy and procedures regarding the risk associated with changeover of control at critical altitudes during the flight. I would say that 150 feet above landing is a critical altitude. The big broker Marsh has called a market meeting to debate $1.1 billion in losses from the cave-in at the Rio Tinto massive Bingham Canyon mine in April. That loss is now expected to exceed about $1.1 billion in direct and facultative costs. Marsh placed the Rio Tinto program. It called for a London market meeting today to discuss aspects of the loss. The Bingham Canyon mine is about 20 miles southwest of Salt Lake City in Utah. It's a copper mine. It's a huge, gigantic hole in the ground. The landslide was the collapse of one of the pit walls. The pit is a little bit less than 3 miles wide and about 3/4 of a mile deep. It's gigantic. The landslide went off on the evening of Wednesday, April 11th. It was expected. Bingham has sensor systems, radar, laser, and seismic and GPS that measure ground movement. Everybody was evacuated 12 hours before the landslide, so no one was hurt. But the scale of the landslide was a big surprise. About 165 million tons of rock shifted, causing a localized earthquake of about 5.1 on the Richter scale. It damaged or destroyed roads, power lines, and other infrastructure, including a number of the giant dump trucks and shovels. The lost equipment was worth tens of millions of dollars, but much more significant is the fact that the landslide has shut down the mine for an undetermined length of time. This mine supplies 17% of U.S. copper consumption and 1% of the world's. When a big loss like that happens, the pinball machine goes tilt. That's the news for today. If we have any breaking news, we'll come back and tell you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.